Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. I just wanted to report on some news that's been going on in the music world. Drake has finally won Artist of the Decade, something that I predicted way back in the day in my 2010s review video. Go back and watch it in the archives. Yeah, but this is great. This is showing me, showing everyone that Drake really deserves the vindication that he gets because like I say in the other video, it wasn't a year in the decade from 2009 when he released So Far Gone to right now in 2021 wasn't a year in the decade that you couldn't turn on the radio and hear either a song that he was featured in or a song that he did himself. He was what Michael Jackson was in the 80s, what Elton John was in the 70s, what the Beatles were in the 60s, what Elvis Presley was in the 50s, and what Eminem was in the 2000s. He was that for this era. There was nobody more dominant in terms of not sales, because we don't live in that type of world anymore. We don't live in that world that we lived in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We live in a world with Spotify. We live in a world with downloads. So, of course, you're going to say, well, he didn't sell as much as Thriller, or he didn't outsell the Beatles, or he didn't outsell Elvis Presley or Elton John or any of those people. But of course he didn't. We live in 2021, this decade. The technology is different. Eminem came up in a time when um, internet was just coming out. Of course, Mariah Carey didn't have that luxury. Elton John did not have that luxury. None of them others had that luxury. Drake has that luxury, and people went to download his stuff to hear his stuff, especially Views, the Views album in 2016. Um, so he had a lot of haters, but we live in a time where it's not going to be unanimous. And I'm sure if we traveled back in time to even when Frank Sinatra was on top of the world in the 1940s, we would find people that didn't like Frank Sinatra, that felt Frank Sinatra was too, he wasn't a real musician. Because remember, at the time that Frank Sinatra came out, um, Frank Sinatra signified the transition from orchestral music like Louis Armstrong was doing, like Duke Ellington was doing, until to vocal music, which became pop music. I'm sure if we go back to the 80s, there were people who liked Prince more than they liked Michael Jackson, again, because they said Prince played instruments and Michael did not. And Michael was more of a dancer than Prince. And they would say that Prince was probably a more talented musician. Just again, like they would say now with Drake, well, he don't write his own raps. He don't write his own stuff. But so what? We live in 2010. I mean, 2021. He got the award for the 2010s. Stop living in the past. Move on. The art form of rap has moved on, just like every genre of music has moved on. We don't live in those times. We can enjoy music from that time and we can appreciate the art from that time, but you can't judge people by the standards of those times. You can't judge them by the standards of the 2000s, by the standards of the 90s, by the standards of the 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, or 40s. You can only judge him by the time he came up in and by the with among his contemporaries, among his peers, not from people back in the day. So when you look at him and you look at the people that were his contemporaries that were on top with him, like a Taylor Swift, like a Nicki Minaj, those type of individuals that came around the same time he did, he was on the radio more consistently than they were. And if you just look within the hip hop genre, yes, he is not hard. He's not DMX. He's not Biggie. He's not Tupac. But he was never claiming to be those people. Again, a different era, a different style of music, a different time. Drake fits this time. So, yeah, you got haters, you got people that will complain, and you got people that will bitch. But again, you probably had those people back in the day as well. You had people, I'll take it as far back as the 90s, because you know, that's just furthest back as I'm able to remember with my own recollection, not from reading it in books and not from studying it, even though I am a student of history. But when you gauge general reactions, you had to be there to know really how popular something really was. In the 90s, you had people who praised Mariah Carey, who said that Mariah Carey was the best there ever was. But you also had people who said that Celine Dion was better than Mariah Carey, that she had a better vocal range than Mariah Carey, that Whitney was better than Mariah Carey. But Mariah Carey sold more records than Whitney, sold more records than Celine Dion. That doesn't make Celine Dion any less, or Celine Dion or Whitney Houston any less better than Mariah Carey. It's just what it was. Mariah Carey just sold more records in the 90s. Again, in the 80s, some people said Prince was better than Michael Jackson. Some still will say that. Some will say that um, in this era, I don't think, see, but that's the difference though. In this era, in the 2010s, you can't really say that there was anybody more dominant than Drake. He was unrivaled. He was completely unrivaled. There was nobody out there. He had no Prince. He had no Whitney. He had no um, Jay um, Jay Z. In the 2000s, you had Eminem and Jay. Some like Eminem, some like Jay. In the 90s, you had Whitney and Mariah. Some like Whitney, some like Mariah, and other people like Celine. In the in the 80s, you had Michael and Prince. Even in the 70s, you had Elton John, but you also had the Bee Gees, that some would say were better than Elton John. You had the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And in the 50s, you had Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis, or Chuck Berry. But you didn't really have, and then even in the 40s, um, yeah, you had Frank Sinatra, but you also had Tony Bennett, you had Perry Como, and other people like this. You didn't really have that in this era where there's anybody you could say, well, okay, I don't agree that it was Drake, except maybe Nicki. But either way, it's a win-win for Lil Wayne. They're both under the same banner. But anyway, congratulations to Drake. And I saw he had his son. He had his son with him, so that was cool. I just really think he's a real humble dude. Again, people hated on him because he don't write his own raps because he came from Degrassi or whatever. But you know what I mean? Fuck the haters. He did what he did. He achieved what he achieved. But anyway, Yeah, OVO gang all day, man. He again, Pusha T came at him, almost destroyed his career. He came back with In Your Feelings and completely revolutionized the game. And even when we were going through heavy COVID, he even jumped on that with Tootsie Slide. You know what I mean? So he's the man, Peace.